So this is the introduction for my action for sustainable futures, and there we are. Hello there, friends. I'd like to go on a little journey with you. It firstly involves a reality check, sort of where we are now, if you will, in relation to the health of the planet, our futures, and ourselves. And these can be some pretty evocative and challenging topics. My intention is to be gentle, but also honest. The reality is, our Mama Earth is in a terrible state, critical in fact, and is much worse than we actually realise or we're led to believe. And it's our fault. More damage has been done to this planet in the last few centuries than in a million years of human existence. We have drastically altered the face of the Earth in such a small amount of time. Almost every life support system is on the brink of collapse, and millions of our fellow species are either extinct or very nearly so. The age of modernity has birthed the powerful economic and social paradigm of capitalism, which brings industrialisation, globalisation, mass commodification, privatisation of land, competition, materialism, and greed, and that's just for starters. Capitalism is a social construct, masquerading as the natural order of things. However, it is anything but natural. It alienates humans from the environment and commodifies everything within it. As we know, humans have not always and do not always live like this. It's been a very recent construct in the grand scheme of things. Most of us are conditioned to be workers for the capitalist machine, earning and spending to keep it in motion, to the detriment of the planet, our fellow species, and ourselves. Striving for the material doesn't feed our souls, but rather leaves us unfulfilled, not fully connected, and always sort of needing more. The essence of capitalism is for perpetual consumerism and economic growth. Materialism has become an addiction and a cultural aspiration, and it is our widely unchallenged reality. It is this, our everyday culture and lifestyle, that has depleted the resources of this planet so drastically. So much, in fact, that many are beyond the point of repair. Do you know that if everybody in the world had so-called Australia's average quality of life, we would need more than 4 Earths to sustain it? Isn't that crazy? I feel blame can be sometimes a futile task, if not a detrimental exercise. But I do, however, think it is important to understand causes, contributing players, and to encourage accountability. Let's do a bit of that. The top 10% of affluent people in the world cause 52% of the globe's carbon emissions. 52%. That was certainly news for me. I presumed it was the top 1% and big business. But what I found even more confronting, and here's an even harder fact to digest, best sit down for this one. The top 10% of affluent people in the world is us. It is our lifestyles that create over half the damage causing climate change. So-called Australia is ranked second in the world for carbon emissions and has one of the highest carbon footprints per capita in the world. Further to that, a whopping 80% of the world's resources are used by only 20% of the world's population. Once again, that's us in the world's richest countries. I understand that this may be hard to swallow, given we don't really lead what I'd consider extravagant lives. But the bare truth of it is, compared to billions elsewhere in the world, we really do. And it's our normal lifestyle that is wreaking ecological and social havoc. Without change, and now, the future is devastatingly bleak. If we don't stay below 1.5 degrees, the Earth heads towards cataclysmic repercussions. We here in so-called Australia have been pretty removed from any tangible connection to the concept of climate change till recently. But the Lismore and Queensland floods and the 2019 fires are just a little taster of what is to come, and blindingly show the manifestation of our inaction. The UN has released figures on the necessary carbon emissions required per capita, a reduction from around 16 to only 2.1 tonnes of carbon, and that's each. This reduction is really daunting, I know, but then again, so is the life-destroying fiery future that is inevitable without us making drastic change. So where do we even begin, you ask? Well, it's pretty essential that we start viewing our future and our role in it from a global perspective. After all, this climate crisis is a planetary catastrophe, and we here in the West are disproportionately responsible for it. It's kind of time we stepped up and start to consider the billions of fellow human beings who are in absolute poverty and even more at risk of major climate change repercussions because of our privileged lifestyles. Science also shows us, contrary to what the political discourse wants us to believe, that simply greening technologically how we do things is far too little, far too late, and it fails to address the issue at a systemic and structural level. An ever-expanding economy still remains the problem, not the solution. The green economy basically becomes an additional arm of the capitalist potential disguised as a solution. Sneaky capitalists. Known for decades that there are limits to growth, and we've reached them. We are in the dystopian future, or at least the start of it, and it's only going to get worse. Is this what we really want? What if we could make change? Deep structural change necessary to shift capitalistic culture, to repair the earth and reconnect with her and each other. Not just treat the symptoms, but the cause of it. Is there another way of being, existing, perhaps even thriving? There is. In the words of the fabulous environmental and political activist George Monbiot, we need a new restoration story. I suggest we make it a choose-your-own adventure. We could look back now as a monumental sliding doors moment for us as a species. The comforting part of knowing we are a huge influence on climate change is that we can be a huge influence in changing our current trajectory. We have the chance to avoid undesirable futures by finding and working towards alternatives. The greatest creative and futurist minds strongly believe we can create a wiser, more conscious, preferred future. By design, right now, rather than being forced to by disaster. Fundamental structural change is necessary, and it must come from the bottom up, at a community level. We already weather the political impotence of the neoliberal conservative regime, so we must take steps to build the future we want for ourselves rather than giving away our collective power by blaming and waiting for government action. We can make the choice to take personal responsibility for our part in the current state of affairs. We have the power to look inwardly and locally to how we can change our own lifestyles and create action at a local level towards global change and a better future for all. Imagine if we would look beyond the capitalistic system of growth to a post-growth future, a future that prioritizes people and planet over profit. The concept of a conserver society is a creatively viable alternative where a lifestyle of voluntary simplicity is adopted. Simplicity has moved from being regarded as a path of regress to be seen as a path of a new kind of progress and social vitality without the shackles of consumption. A lifestyle where overconsumption is steeply contracted, decolonisation is strategized, indigenous ideologies are integrated, collectivity is fundamental, and we allow ourselves time and space to explore what a flourishing life could look like in non-material ways. We need to reduce our consumption here in the developed world, dramatically, bottom line. By working towards a conserver society, we could live a life where we don't have to work at a job nearly as much, and spend more time connecting with nature, our community, loved ones, sharing ideas and labour, where we reject consumer culture, reduce wealth and create a more self-sufficient, nourishing existence, lessening our outrageous carbon footprint in the process and feeding our souls. This approach addresses both the ecological and social disasters omnipresent in our current reality. How do we do this, you ask? I mean, we need to pay rent, eat, and living is expensive. This is so very true, and the structures in place were designed to keep the machine turning, and you firmly in position amongst it, a cog in the machine, if you will. So the privatisation of land is a huge barrier to a simpler lifestyle. Many position this as theft and a human rights issue, that as human beings we actually have an innate right to land, the same as we do to air and water. After all, land is nature, and the private ownership of it is only a very recent concept. Who deemed that land was theirs to give away anyway? That's another video. Imagine if we had more urban public housing instead of engaging with the market in rent or mortgage, not just as a welfare necessity, but as a choice of lifestyle, destigmatised and a viable collaborative alternative. With really cheap roofs over our head, living on common land with community gardens, shared tools, etc., where we put time into collective labour and some sort of another and drastically curbed our expenditure, we wouldn't have to work at a job as much. We could dramatically reduce our carbon footprint and design our lives doing things that could nourish ourselves and others rather than continuing to just feed the machine. Imagine what this freedom and unity could do for senses of belonging, connection, mental health, loneliness. It's a win-win all round. I know these ideas seem somewhat radical, perhaps even far-fetched, but the truth is, people have been living like this in many parts of the globe since time immemorial, and it wasn't so long ago what is now the developed world was too. There are many communities popping up globally who have integrated these more indigenous methods and having amazing success. One such initiative is a neighbourhood that works. Check out the website. For now, maybe we should just let all we've covered today sink in, to ferment, to a nice brew. Let's start conversations and perhaps doing a little research into what other people are already doing to transition from our consumer prison and seriously thinking about how we want to live our life honourably and happily. And ask yourself, if you could design whatever future you wanted, within reason, bearing in mind our current global situation, what would you do? What would you want? I'll leave that there with you. Thank you so much for your time.